Hi everyone, this is Tom Parmalee with funeralvision.com, and joining me today is Jake Johnson, the president and CEO of Johnson Consulting Group, which is a total solutions business consulting firm serving the death care profession. It's celebrating its 25th anniversary of serving funeral homes and cemeteries, which is no small accomplishment. First, Jake, thanks so much for joining me today.
Tom, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Tell me, I think everyone in death care pretty much knows what Johnson Consulting does. They know your name, but I know, your services and what you provide has probably changed over those 25 years. So, give us a quick rundown on the main services you provide at Johnson Consulting Group and, the scope of your work.
Yep, absolutely. So it originates from my background, my father's background originally, in helping people, helping himself buy funeral homes, if you will, and then going through the selling experience during that process of when he his own acquisition firm. And then for me, getting out of school, working for Keystone Group, working in their business development department, and then doing deal analysis. It was just a part that I really enjoyed with my background in finance. So first and foremost, we're a mergers and acquisitions succession planning firm. We help people sell funeral businesses to the next generation or the third parties, and then or help them buy businesses. And certainly because of that and the comparable market data we have, business valuations with that. So that's our primary business. And then as we've grown, which I'll touch on, as well, maybe in some later comments, but we there was a lot of resources that I noticed that I had available to me through my father. When he did his roll-up company, um, he had a CFO, he had uh, uh, regional vice presidents and things of that nature. And so when it came time to where we were helping people with succession planning to the next generation or helping somebody buy a business, naturally they're like, where do I go for accounting? Where do I go for a business coach or consultant, somebody to help me start off right, a business assessment, and then of course surveying and sales. And so we do all of that. So survey sales analysis through our performance tracker software, back office support accounting, and then most notably our business consulting, where it's incentive compensation plans, leadership and management conferences that we host, coaching, consulting, you name it. It kind of runs the whole thing, as well as along with that, naturally, then loan sourcing when people are looking for loans. So a lot of different things, and it's kind of the life cycle of a funeral business. I'm a funeral business owner, so it was one of those things that was a natural progression for me. And John's Consult, I drink from the Kool-Aid as it relates to that. So
Now, growing up as a young boy, young man, as you got older, you saw your dad working in the funeral profession. What did you think about what he did? And I know your curiosity probably grew as you get older. But when was it where you really had an inkling that this might be something you also might want to do?
right, it's for me, what my father had done to build up his name, reputation, and the career that he had. He had a lot of contacts that would have taken me quite a bit of time, if ever, to establish in this business. And so I saw that as an opportunity for me if I could prove my own self, because they weren't going to just they would acknowledge me because of my father, but I had to earn that respect myself. And so that was kind of the aha moment for me that it would help me accelerate my career quicker. And then the rest would be up to me, as my father would say. But being from a family from Batesville, Indiana, I didn't grow up there, but we always were back and forth there. And a lot of my friends from Batesville, quite ironically, from second grade when I left there to today, I still know these people. So it's kind of, just small town. So, but that's a town of funeral service. So you leave there either selling caskets or selling hospital beds. So
T Take us back in time to say 25 years ago when your dad launched Johnson Consulting Group. What were you doing at that time, and what did you think about him, sort of striking out on his own? He'd been very successful at that point, but here he was doing something completely new. Just give us a snapshot of what was going through your mind at that time and what you thought about what he was doing.
right. So he sold his company, moved to Florida, like many people will, for tax purposes, and or been living in Florida, and was playing a bunch of golf. He was a fun guy to hang around. Life was good for dad. Always a fun guy to hang around, but life was good, especially as a son. Hanging out with somebody who I got to see more now because he was always so busy traveling. And as he was enjoying his retirement, it did not happen too much long after that he was just getting calls from a lot of his acquaintances, people that told somebody to reach out to him because he could help them understand, operations of a funeral home, or more importantly, how to buy one or sell one. And so he started doing that, and it was a little project here and there, and where he really uh, established himself where he needed to establish the company to kind of house the income from it was when he was asked to look at the business that he had sold to Lowen and help that through a bunch of investors really divest it back into all the private ownership again, which is quite ironic. I don't know how many times you get a chance to buy a bunch of businesses, sell them, and then be handed them back in a way where you can sell them back to the people you bought them from successfully. And Dad was just good at doing that stuff. So, when I watched him do that, um, I asked him what his goals were. He said, "Well, I don't, I enjoy retirement. So maybe one day if you're interested, you can come on board." And then for me at the time, I was working at Palm Mortuaries, kind of getting the boots on the ground experience, doing funeral arrangements, managing funeral homes, cemeteries. That was a great experience. So when the time came, then I made that decision to come over and work with Dad, just him and I at the time.
Yeah. At Johnson Consulting, I think in many ways it became even more successful for him than his previous career in funeral service. Despite how much he had accomplished, you quickly became really, the preeminent, if, one of the preeminent consulting firms in funeral service. Um, do you think he was surprised by his success, or was he pretty confident all along that Johnson Consulting would reach that level?
I think he was surprised at my father was born on Friday the 13th, but he's been nothing but lucky in his life when he was alive. And so he stepped into this consulting in a time where, the funeral business industry profession was going through some changes. He retired in 1996. I started in 1996, and up to 2000, it was a pretty fun ride for me. And then, the industry really kind of failed, and, SCI almost went bankrupt. Loan Group did go bankrupt. Nobody was buying. And so it was a great time for me to work at Palm Mortuary, and it was a great time for my father to be retired. But it was in that time where he got this opportunity. I think it was 2002, to help with his former company. And then, then the buyers were slowly kind of, like SCI in that case, was kind of first looking at what are their less accretive assets and what can they do with those, who can help them, because their business development department had changed. And so, as timing would be, and I think timing, if you look up that definition, you see my father's picture among some other people, as a definition. He would just hit it at the right time with Johnson Consulting, and then me coming on in 2004. And then, if you reflect back on those years in there, that's when we had a lot of liquidations occurring, which we were involved with SCI, with the acquisition of Lowen and then Stewart. And then that really helped our customer base, and we just started growing from there. But 2004, it was just Dad and I. We were working out of our homes at the time.
Tell us, about the Golf Classic. I know you
Yep.
recently renamed it in honor of your father. But about when did that start, and whose idea was it? And maybe just share some of your thoughts on the tremendous good that it has done throughout the years. I know it has raised a tremendous amount of money.
Yep. So I think we're on the 42nd year. So if that puts it in the 80s or something like that, I have some early pictures where there were 8 golfers in a motorhome heading to Palm Springs, and now we're 120 plus golfers, and a lot of key executives within the funeral space, and current funeral home owners and retired funeral home owners. my father, I have like a little thing on my desk that is like it says it's about relationships, and he was always about that, and that's what that golf event was about. It was about the camaraderie, getting people together, and then I want to say, I can't identify the year exactly. Maybe it was 2004 or five. My father joined the Funeral Service Foundation early on, and they immediately assigned him to the golf to manage the golf portion of it to help raise more money. But he this Memorial Classic has grown to something. But when he was at the Funeral Service Foundation, my point was going to be that's where he got this notion that he could utilize his golf event for the good of the funeral profession beyond what it was doing from relationship building. And so they started raising money, and now we're over 1 million to, if you include Funeral Service Foundation, ICCFA Educational Trust, and now we've started with Selected's Educational Trust as well. So it's pretty cool, and everybody that goes there, we have a good time, and they all are their generosity, and then what we can give back from Memorial Classic has been pretty humbling for sure.
During your time at Johnson Consulting, what are some of the biggest changes that you've made at the company or that have transpired at the company over the years? And I guess, paired with that, how do you envision Johnson Consulting continuing to evolve as we move into the future?
Yeah. So early on, it was really to take this concept of who my father was and the knowledge he had and create a product out of that service. So it was really about systematizing, if at some level, if you will, creating processes and having a vision that I had really to make it something more than it was, if you will, and parlay what we had and grow from there. So, creating those systems was kind of the phase one, and then slowly bringing people on and then training them, and spending a lot of hours creating more Jake Johnsons, if you will, and Tom Johnsons. And then as we ventured into other services, finding those key people, because I can't be an expert at everything, and finding those people that are experts at accounting and business consulting. And so, the progression of that, and then establishing ourselves in our own office next to the funeral home, that Whitney Murphy Funeral Home that's there today. Now the business sold to Al Asta, but the and Sean Murphy. So that was a fun part to go from there, and then taking it from there and then expanding on that. And we acquiring Thomas Pearson Company, and Karen McCurdy came over. Thomas Pierce was a very the large broker back in the 90s in the funeral space, and then just searching out the talent and growing and reinvesting. I'm a big reinvestor in businesses. I've done it at my own funeral home, and I've done it at Johnson Consulting, and it's paid off well. I remember calling MKJ, who was a marketing company, and I remember talking to Glenn or Marilyn and saying, "Look, I'd like to double our marketing. What would that do?" They said, "Well, that would probably make an impact if you're really serious about doing it, because it was a meaningful size of money at
Hmm.
the time for us, which would have been well over 10% marketing budget or something like that." So that was a big change. And then we've constantly just tried to stay abreast with technology, whatever. So it continually evolves.
You mentioned briefly earlier that you're also a funeral home owner, and I think that might be something that not everybody realizes that
Yep.
in addition to all your work at Johnson Consulting, that you are an owner. So tell us a little bit about that. And I'm also curious, how open you are to maybe doing more acquisitions, either as a funeral home owner yourself. Or you
Hmm.
mentioned Thomas Pierce, maybe, as the owner of Johnson Consulting. Is that something you're always on the lookout for in terms of what other companies in funeral service might fit into the fold?
Hmm. Uh, I'm always doing that. In fact, it makes it a little exhausting for my Jeff Casey, my COO, and Kristen, my CFO, because I'm always the guy with the idea, right? And so we're a good team in wrangling in when we can do that and when we need to hold back and wait with other initiatives we have. But my funeral home, it's been great to own. I hired the manager that I worked with at Palm Mortuary to come work there, and Kelly has available to her all the tools that we do at Johnson Consulting, and that's caused us to, I mean, we've grown revenue by 30%. I'd say 30 plus percent. So it's been fun to do. I think one of the kind of interesting reflections was when I acquired the funeral home. It's Menke Funeral Home, but I wanted to change it to something to include cremation because we're an 80% cremation firm. And so we renamed it Menke Funeral and Cremation Center. And I was standing outside, they're putting the sign up, and the landscaper's with me that was redoing the landscape. And he said, "That's interesting. Are you guys starting to do cremation now?" And so it was just the aha moment I was expecting that, if we don't say it, they don't know. And so from there, along with Kelly's support and the tools we use at Johnson Consulting, it's been a fun ownership. And then, yes, to answer your question, I've always kept in touch with my surrounding competition. And one day, if that's an opportunity, that'd be something that I would look forward to and growing in my area, if you will, and staying very local. We also have funeral homes in Batesville, Indiana, because that's where we're from. So the funeral home is owned under my father's trust, and we recently acquired two locations in neighboring towns. And so, we're kind of staying central in there, but we've got a good recipe once again with our kind of virtual COO services and the things that we do that it's worked out well in Batesville and now hopefully in the two new towns we acquired in. So absolutely. And on top of that, to answer your question, definitely, I think there are always opportunities with other firms that have good plugins to what we do in the funeral space, consulting or otherwise. And so we're always looking out for that. It's just fun. It's the kind of I was always big into video games, if you will, and so I see it as a game, quite frankly. It's the business game.
I know you've done a lot of deals in your lifetime. I'm curious, is there a deal that got away? A deal that looking back in time you didn't do, but you wish you had done.
Mhm.
I don't know how much you can share about that. Maybe, maybe if you don't want to mention names, that's fine, but maybe you can give us some general insights on something like that if there's ever a deal that you didn't do that you wish you'd done.
Yep. When we were doing involved in the liquidations of the FTC mandated divestitures for SCI, there were some properties within the Lowen and Stewart packages that, with the interest level in them and our interest level, it melded well and still satisfied, the ultimate goal for the shareholders. And there was one in particular that we had under LOI, and I wish we had closed on it. Quite frankly, we found a better offer than our offer, and so we did the right thing and sold it to the new buyer, who's about tripled the equity value of that business. So it's been sobering. I'm happy, but it's an opportunity that we passed up. So
Is there one piece of business advice that really stands out to you? Maybe it came from your dad, maybe somebody else, but is there a lasting, piece of guidance that you received that has sort of been a guiding compass, if you will, throughout your career that you'd like to share?
I think there's a couple actually because I've learned from my father and from my own experiences. One is, when we think of succession planning, I think people don't think about succession planning as an employee. When I started my career at Keystone Group, I think I mean, at Johnson Consulting, I think it was 31, or we were talking about this. And I immediately was thinking about where I wanted to take that company and where I wanted to be from responsibility and daily workload and what have you. And so, I think a lot of us tend to not think about succession planning for ourselves as employees when we start out. And that's a shame because unfortunately, we're all only on this face of this planet for about the same amount of time. We call it 78 years or 85. And the last part isn't as fun as the front part. So, what are you doing to challenge yourself beyond, and make that vision something that's hard to reach. And when, by God, if you hit it, you're hitting on all cylinders, but that you always have a goal. They call it the North Star, but that you know what that goal is and how you're going to get there. That's a big one for me. For my father, it was pretty straightforward. Do what you say you're going to do, be organized. I watched him and Steve Tidwell from SCI, before they left, they kind of summarized their day, documented what they did on a notepad at that time, what was going to happen the next day, and they prioritized. And so, being organized, follow through. If you don't know the answer, don't make it up. Ask, tell somebody you don't, but you'll get the answer and learn from that. And so that was a big deal for me because there's really in some ways, as we build our careers, you yourself and myself, the only way we can learn is by learning from our mistakes or just learning from others. And so that was a big thing for me.
Now, at Johnson Consulting, obviously you're the face of the company. People know a few other of the executives around you, very well. But you got a pretty big team. How many employees do you have, and what makes the culture at Johnson Consulting so special? What do you appreciate about leading the company and being part of that group?
Right. I think it's invaluable to be an HR first company, if you will, because if the people are happy, things seem to happen. Good things happen. And so we're an employee base of about 35 employees or so, and we now work remote. We've before COVID, we were already exploring with that because we're a project-based workload, and it's worked very well. It's also gone with an extra focus on culture, making sure that we all get together. But we have a very I'm not going to call it rigorous because I would call it a fun onboarding experience. 30, 60, 90 days goals. We're in the process or right now this time of year of reviews, and then in those reviews setting goals and what we want to accomplish. But I give a lot of credit to Jeff Casey, the COO, who I've known before I could drive, quite frankly, and he's just a very good culture guy. And then I am the same way. I've always wanted people to have the tools and the resources they need to be successful. And I'll say it now, and I always say it. I said it this morning on our customer service kind of a check-in meeting that we have every Wednesday, but I'd be the first to shake a hand and congratulate somebody for finding the next job for themselves. And we were part of elevating them to that next level of their career. So I think people see that because it's not words, it's definitely in practice and what we do at Johnson Consulting. So we enjoy. It's been fun for that reason, and it's never without its challenges. It's never but we get a lot done and people are the ones that I'm so proud of. So, I can't bring along some ego that I can do all that. It's not possible. Plus I'll just end up having to do it all and I'll be miserable. So,
Well, you've been incredibly great with your time here. Just a couple final questions. While I have you here, I have to ask you about what the world of acquisitions is looking like right now. Is the
yeah.
pipeline good? Are you seeing a robust activity? What do values look like in terms of multiples and whatnot? Maybe you can share some quick thoughts on what you're seeing right now.
Yeah, no, it's busy. It is busy. You see the surveys out there within FDA on the succession that will be occurring, over the profession, and probably applies to any small business in the United States with this baby boomer, phenomena. So we've had a good year. We'll have a bit even busier year next year. So I can't complain. And I would say the interesting thing, and it's yet to see kind of what this means in total for our profession, but there's probably no less than 20 new buyers slash acquisition PE funded companies in our space in the last 3 years. There's everybody's gotten the words out, that we're a good, solid, predictable profession, and you've got the baby boomer phenomenon. So the succession planning has been very busy for sure.
Well, Jake, I just want to congratulate you on 25 years and on
Thank you.
a personal level. It's been really cool having broken into this profession some, 20 years ago now. And your dad was incredibly supportive of me in my former role. And it's just been really cool to reinvent myself and then also work closely with you. And you've been a great supporter of mine as well. So, I just can't thank your dad, who's no longer with us. I can't thank him enough.
Yeah,
And then
thank you.
you as well, and Johnson Consulting, and all the work that they do to help the profession. Just my hats off to you and your entire team.
Well, I appreciate your support, and it's always been great working with you. I mean, your roles that you've stepped into and the information you provide back to the profession is awesome. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jake, and congratulations again on 25 years.
Thank you.